This video is sponsored by Raycon. A Cure for Wellness is one of the most requested modern films I've ever received, and 5 years since its release, despite my own curiosity and anticipation, I never had a chance to actually see it until now. It's the type of film that seems to have a recurring presence when I'm searching for a new horror movie to watch, and while I've seen the trailer several times and have tilted my head at many weird stills without context, going into it, I still had no idea what the hell it was actually about. It certainly didn't help that I've heard nothing but polarizing opinions that my best guess describing it before going in would be, what if Guillermo del Toro directed a gothic horror version of Shutter Island? And coming out of it, I'd like to think I wasn't too far off. Regardless, I'm always looking for relatively obscure films to cover that were technically mainstream, yet just too unconventional to make an impact in their time, and no better modern film perfectly exemplifies that more than A Cure for Wellness. I mean, put it this way, how could I say no to a psychological horror by the visionary director behind Pirates of the Caribbean and The Ring, Gore Verbinski, and the uncredited writer behind the critically acclaimed Morbius? I should also mention this movie is 2.5 hours long, so yep, that's right. We're in for an auteur epic here, folks, so you know the drill by this point. Brace yourself. A Cure for Wellness tells the story of a young, ambitious corporate climber called Lockhart, who's sent by his company's board of directors to locate their CEO Roland Pembroke at a mysterious wellness centre in the Swiss Alps. But upon arrival, Lockhart soon finds himself becoming a patient within the centre after a sudden road accident, leading him down a bizarre and twisted rabbit hole in which he believes the doctors are using the sick patients for sinister, possibly otherworldly experiments. That's all I can really say without spoiling anything, but you can immediately see where I got the Del Toro meets Shutter Island comparison. It's drenched in a multitude of genre and stylistic influences, ranging from silent era expressionism to noir, to hammer horror tropes, to 50s, 60s Vincent Price chillers, to even Lovecraftian-esque themes that calling it a psychological horror is either a profound understatement or a monstrous misdirection. In fact, if you really want to set your expectations accordingly, I personally feel it's more appropriately viewed as a meandering homage to classical science fiction. In its most basic form, it's Frankenstein without the monster. Well, that's of course until you meet the diabolical as fuck villain in the second half of the story. Now, to bluntly answer the question of whether this movie justifies its egregious 2.5 hour runtime, no. The payoff, while unique to say the least, is a little underwhelming for the abundance of long-winded scenes that ultimately don't go anywhere. The story can sometimes feel overwhelmingly bloated with concepts and plot threads that don't get enough breathing room or simply lack a follow-through or conclusion despite their intriguing implications. For example, it's a mild spoiler, but the reason we learn Lockhart is specifically sent to locate his boss is because he's under threat by the board over some vague security and financial fraud he's being investigated for, which sounds like a major plot point to his character, but once we're in the wellness center, the movie literally forgets about it and it never comes back to haunt him. However, at the same time, unless you're keeping tabs on every small detail, you're likely going to forget about it yourself, because at some point the movie is tackling existential themes of aging and health, then the next we're dealing with trauma, madness, and the incomprehensible, and then out of nowhere we're witnessing some legitimately unnerving body horror that, if you haven't already checked out by that point, you're at least morbidly curious to see where all this insanity is going. Look, I wholeheartedly respect its ambition and genuinely love its efforts at originality. There are some themes in here that I don't even think are touched all that often by other horror movies. It's also just nice to see a major Hollywood studio greenlight such a bonkers reimagining of an old school mad scientist story. Now, of course, a video like this is made possible thanks to my sponsors at Raycon. Whether you're always on the go or relaxing after a long day at work, Raycon's everyday earbuds provide reliable, fantastic sound quality for all your music, podcast, and movie watching needs. Raycon always strive to improve the versatility of their earbuds to ensure you get more bang for your buck, but without the hassle of complicated intrusions. I recently got my hands on a fresh new pair of Raycons, and one of my favourite features is the option to switch between 3 different sound profiles by simply holding the left earbud for 3 seconds. Typically, I start my day on balanced sound for the likes of videos and films, but when I'm at the gym, I switch to bass sound to boost the beat of the music to electrify my workout. Then when I'm taking it easy with an audiobook, I switch to pure sound to refine the spoken word audio. Best of all, if I happen to be travelling, Raycon allows me to switch between noise isolation and awareness mode to ensure I can keep safe and hear what's going on around me. Raycon even provides several different earbuds modified to give you the perfect comfortable fit so that they never fall out, especially in your more chaotic moments. All of this comes packed in a slick charging case to offer 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life, and still remains half the price of other premium audio brands. With over 49,000 5-star reviews, click the link in the description box below or go to buyraycon.com/Ryan to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. So for some, I think the big factor that will make or break your experience watching the film is your attachment to the central perspective of Lockhart, played by Dane DeHaan. Much like Shutter Island, you more or less see everything through his eyes, with the intent of making you doubt his sanity as things get weirder. But with all due respect to DeHaan, I've got to admit there is a noticeable lack of screen presence and charisma when matched against Leonardo DiCaprio, yet that's like comparing a hamburger to a 3-course fine dining cuisine. To be fair, I don't blame the lesser engagement on DeHaan, because in the context of Lockhart's characterization, it makes sense for him to be somewhat cold and uncharismatic. When cracks begin to show in Lockhart's corporate hustler persona, you begin to see the vulnerability beneath him that appropriately suits the physical stature of DeHaan. The whole idea is that he's living in a world of aggressive, thick-skinned, work-obsessed leaders and sycophants that smell weakness a mile off, which is technically what the board used to pressure Lockhart into a fetch quest that's below his rising status in the company. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm sure DeHaan could kick the shit out of me in real life, but he looks visually weak and frail. He doesn't have the strong leading man masculinity we're accustomed to, that's more or less highlighted by the film's core theme. As the title states, it's a story that ponders over what wellness is to humanity. That is, we see all this talk about desiring strength and power, yet it comes from a place of unhealthy obsession and desperation, which is an irony to Lockhart and the people he works for. When the film opens with him on the top floor of his New York office looking down on the people, there is an immediate elitism established that reaches cult levels of creepiness when we finally reach the wellness center. There's this troublesome ethos instilled by Lockhart from an early age where men must rise to the top, aspire to be gods amongst each other, dethrone their competition and emerge powerful, triumphant and in control of their destinies. Yet, do I really need to point out the problem with that mentality? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with having passionate hustle, but speaking for myself and my own experiences, in today's climate of overworked burnout, Lockhart's growing acknowledgement of how much it actually hurts him rather than betters him is a sincerely relatable situation. He's a young man driven to overcome not only his weakness, or rather what he perceives as weakness in this cutthroat corporate world, but also that of his father, whom he witnessed committing suicide after a stock market crash when he was a child. The ultimate truth is that his stressful ambition, which is costing him his health and well-being, comes from a place of fear and sadness. Calling him depressed feels like a pretty accurate depiction of his character, given how emotionally detached he is from everyone around him. He seems resigned from living a healthy life, and can't get past this idea that the world is nothing more than this cold, colourless dog-eat-dog fight for status. Lockhart simply looks like this compressed bubble of palpable pressure and restlessness that's further symbolized by his struggles to quit smoking. One could even link his trauma over the death of his father as an omen that Lockhart is potentially following in his father's fatal footsteps.
You know, I always told your father to rest, but he wouldn't listen.
He was weak.
This is then extended to the death of his mother, when he makes an effort to be there for her during her own sickness, but during her cremation, Lockhart tells the priest he was the only person left in her life, like she was for him, seemingly making him question what meaning he has in his own life when he now has nobody left to share it with. Essentially, there is a deep-seated loneliness to Lockhart's character, a forlorn need to keep up his hustle and appearances as a means to run away from his vulnerabilities. While he has these big, bold aspirations to be a top-dog, high-flying executive, his life is still ultimately empty. Now, moving on to the wellness center, there is initially a bit of ambiguity over its purpose and existence, where you're not quite sure if it's really this therapeutic health clinic or some luxury spa for rich people. Soon enough, they begin calling it a sanitarium, suggesting that the clients don't exactly have much free will in this place, posing the question of whether they're here by choice because they want to relax and get better, or they're actually prisoners to some strange, obscure sickness that nobody seems to be able to explain. Keep that cryptic sickness in mind because it is the big looming question over the wellness center. What the hell sickness do these people have, and what is actually causing it? By the way, while I'm on it, I should mention that there's technically nothing to stop Lockhart from leaving the center anytime he wants, or at least it initially seems that way when he ventures into town to get answers. But what does physically stop him from getting far is his seemingly never healing broken leg, and the eventual threat the doctors believe he poses when his assertive push for answers grows increasingly hostile. Anyway, given the center is implied to be exclusive to rich people or some sort of special clientele, although that's purely because the CEO of a major Wall Street financial firm decides to use it, it did give me creepy rehab vibes where I imagine out-of-touch rich people would go after they feel cancelled or whatever. There is an unnatural discomfort to it, because on the one hand it seems like a psychiatric institution where everyone is sedated like Shutter Island, but then the treatments within it scream weird alternative medicine and healing practices. Oddly enough, it reminded me of that episode of Silicon Valley where the CEO gets blood transfusions from a young healthy man to maintain his youth or whatever. It's that kind of absurd billionaire bubble I imagine exists somewhere that we don't know about, and it matches the fact that Lockhart and a mysterious young girl called Hannah are the only young people within the facility. Interestingly, one of the things I kept forgetting about when we get to the wellness center is that the movie is set in the present day, yet begins to feel like a period piece inside the center, as if time begins to stand still for Lockhart, thus opposing the fast-paced hustle lifestyle he had prior. There's just something about the wellness center that seems disconnected from time and space, like it exists in its own realm. Whether or not it eventually serves a narrative purpose, it's all these details that really pulled me into the first half. It overloads you with so much stuff to theorize on, that my immediate suspicion was that we were dealing with some sort of Call of Cthulhu Fountain of Youth style ordeal, given there is a very explicit emphasis placed on the patients being told to keep drinking water. Water becomes the prevailing motif of the film. It doesn't ever shy away from calling attention to the fact that there's clearly something in it, thus explaining the physical source of the sickness. Just with my own surface level knowledge, it's pretty abundant with biblical allusions. For one, there's the Garden of Eden vibe to the older patients trying to return to their innocence, and that's on top of the whole obsession with holy water and its association with rebirth, cleansing, and baptism. And hell, there's the whole Adam's ale colloquialism of water being the purest of purifying creations. Furthering this, when Lockhart first awakens from his car accident, he's greeted by the head Dr. Heinrich, whom you should keep in mind because he becomes very relevant in the second half of the story, where Lockhart then proceeds to tell him how he had the best night's sleep in years. However, being the one cynical soul in the film, Lockhart very quickly sees through the illusion that Heinrich has over the patients, where they think the center is rejuvenating them off their sickness, when in fact it's clearly the opposite. Before the second half exposition dump, there is a wonderfully observant delivery that gives you a very vivid picture of how this center manipulates the people within it. When you take everything I've just said about Lockhart's physical and mental health, the center presents one simple yet profound idea to these patients. Imagine having a cure for all your ills, your fatigue, your stress, aches, pains, anxieties, and become the most physically and mentally comfortable version of yourself. But the reality is that the whole thing is warped in this delusional faith of its existence. In other words, this grand idea of curing wellness is entirely a placebo. Like with all the controversy surrounding alternative medicines and healing practices, what it's actually doing is making these people more sick. So from this point onwards, we are entering into major spoiler territory, but just to clarify my issue with the pacing, the movie finds the most convoluted route to tell its story to the point it's so stretched thin that the more inquisitive viewer will likely figure out the twist long before they get to it. It makes very inefficient use of its time and can become vapid and repetitive. It even feels a need to prolong its climax, yet still somehow end abruptly. There were at least 3 points I thought the movie was going to end, and it just kept on going. But what truly hurts the twist is that it simply doesn't spend any time developing the actual conflict behind Dr. Heinrich. He barely has a presence until later into the second half of the story, and when you finally piece together all the contrived details, it is batshit insane. Basically, Lockhart learns that the center was originally an aristocratic castle owned by a tyrannical baron who incestuously married his sister to impregnate her to give birth to a pure-blood heir. However, the baron's sister was infertile, so he terrorized and fatally experimented on the local townsfolk until he successfully found a cure, leading to the locals seeking vengeance by burning down the castle and killing the baron and his sister wife by cutting out her baby and throwing said baby into an aquifer beneath the castle. But the baby miraculously survived due to the groundwater's mysterious rejuvenating effects on eels living within it, despite being naturally toxic to humans. Bear with me here because it gets weirder. So the story goes that Dr. Heinrich devised the wellness center as a means of continuing the baron's experiments by manipulating patients into drinking the water housed in the aquifer in order to filter out the toxic elements, leaving only the concentrated rejuvenating effects, thus greatly prolonging the health and life expectancy of those who ingest it, including slowing down their rate of aging. I'll give you a second because, we're not done yet. If you were the inquisitive type, then you've probably worked out where this is going, but Dr. Heinrich is revealed to be the Baron keeping his surviving daughter Hannah alive through treatments in order to marry and impregnate her to continue his pure blood heritage. I am not making this up. There's even a House of Wax style reveal where Dr. Heinrich's face is actually a mask hiding his disfigurement following the castle fire, and I should also mention there's like a several 100-year gap between the fire and the present day, hence the reduced aging process. It's still not Yoga Hoser's level of absurd reveal, but it's definitely up there. The movie takes a grotesque turn into torture territory where Lockhart is subjected to the same painful filter treatment as the patients who are slowly dying of dehydration. He ends up succumbing to his depression and accepting his illness, making me think a tragic ending was on the way, but there's a ballerina artifact symbolic of his mother that Hannah returns to him that reignites his vigor to escape, as well as discovering his leg was never actually broken. Yeah, it's a lot to digest plot-wise, but on a pure thematic level, it does somewhat partially dilute the significance of Lockhart's character and his relationship with the wellness. On the one hand, it wants to be taken seriously as a thought-provoking art film, while on the other, it's a genre love letter that doesn't wholly synergize with its more meditative elements. In the end, Hannah kills her father, Lockhart burns down the wellness center, and they both escape as the patients dance around the fire while the staff try to put it out. It's a liberating conclusion after all the dire stuff that comes before, like a much-needed fairy tale ending that overcomes the cynical, cruel world Lockhart's journey began in. We actually see him smile for once, where he feels free from his personal oppression and has someone in which to now share his life with. Lockhart has found what was lost, and while not neatly executed, his emotional journey does come full circle. He even encounters the board of directors down the road who tell him to get in the car and return to work, but like the feeling I got from the elderly patients looking to reclaim their tranquil innocence in this supposed Eden, Lockhart and Hannah continue on, embracing the sunrise with a newfound wellness for life. And that concludes A Cure for Wellness. As I said in the beginning, it is a really ambitious story that could do with a bit of refocus and fat trimming, but there are some genuinely great concepts buried within it that keep you invested until the end. So until next time, please leave your thoughts in the comments below, stay safe, stay away from wellness centers with eel-infested waters, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye!